What would you think if one day you discovered that the leaky faucet wasn't the only thing cracked in your home? This is my story, and it began on the day of my 36th birthday. The Beverly Hills sun slanted through the vast French windows of the kitchen, catching the faint shimmer on the marble countertop where the morning's coffee cup still sat, untouched. Sophia stood barefoot on the heated tile floor, one hand curled loosely around the stem of a half-finished glass of white wine. It was only 11:07 a.m., but time felt irrelevant in a house where the clocks ticked for appearances, not purpose. The house was quiet, always too quiet. Not the kind of silence that comforted, but the kind that reminded you something was missing. Sophia breathed in deeply, her silk robe fluttering slightly as she stepped toward the sink. The dripping had become rhythmic, like a metronome marking the tempo of her loneliness. She had noticed it 2 nights ago, but today, it felt like the faucet was mocking her. Each droplet punctuated a truth she didn't want to name. She was alone. Technically, she was married. Mark was still her husband. On paper, they were a picture-perfect couple, a real estate tycoon and his elegant, Ivy League-educated wife, photographed at charity galas, smiling in glossy magazine spreads, praised for the timeless aesthetic and modern success. But Sophia knew better than anyone how staged those smiles were. Behind them was the reality of cancelled dinners, interrupted calls, kisses that grazed skin but not soul. Mark traveled often, too often. Dubai, Singapore, Paris. The time zones became excuses, then habits, then indifference. When he was home, he brought back perfumes from duty-free and polished apologies. He asked how her book club was going, what her Pilates instructor said, whether she was still painting. But his questions were scaffolding, built to hold up the illusion, never meant to touch the heart. Sophia used to wait up for him. Then she started pretending to sleep. Now, she didn't even flinch when the door creaked open at 2 a.m. She knew his cologne better than his touch. There was no affair, not that she knew of. But in many ways, betrayal didn't need a third person. It crept in through neglect, through the widening spaces between 2 bodies lying in the same bed. She once read that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And Mark had mastered it. She poured the rest of the wine down the sink. The faucet gurgled, spat once, then resumed its drip. Sophia tilted her head. The sound was oddly therapeutic in its persistence, like it was trying to remind her that something, somewhere, still responded to pressure. Later that afternoon, she scrolled through her phone, looking for a plumbing service. Mark always insisted on using the corporate vendor, insured, certified, guaranteed, but Sophia wanted something else. Someone else, a service that didn't recognize her last name, that wouldn't send a follow-up satisfaction survey to Mark's email. She found a local independent contractor with barely any reviews and a vague website. But there was a phone number. That's all she needed. Her voice, when she called, was softer than she intended, almost like she was speaking into a confession booth. Yes, I have a leak, kitchen sink. I'd appreciate someone coming by today. She didn't mention the marble floors, or the security gate, or that she lived alone most days. She just said thank you and hung up. For a moment, she felt the strangest flutter in her chest, something between anticipation and shame. That evening, she lit a candle on the windowsill, not for ambience, but for herself. She sat at the edge of the long dining table, a plate of salmon growing cold in front of her. The other chair, Mark's, remained untouched. She no longer set his plate. At 8:23 p.m., she heard the gate buzz. She glanced at the security feed. A man in a gray work shirt stood outside, tool bag in hand. He looked young, maybe late 20s. There was something refreshingly unpolished about him. Sophia stood, checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, and undid the top clasp of her robe. Not out of seduction, she told herself, just comfort, just breathable. As she opened the door, the scent of rain on warm asphalt drifted in, and with it, something else, a feeling she hadn't known in years, the possibility of being seen, not as a wife, not as a fixture in a house, but as a woman. And so, she smiled, not just with her lips, but with that small, aching part of her heart that had gone dormant. It was a smile of quiet defiance. The kind you give when you know you're about to cross a line. Or maybe just recognize one that had already faded long ago. The faucet would be fixed. Or not. It didn't matter anymore, because the crack in the pipe wasn't the only one in that house. And she was no longer afraid to see what would leak through. He arrived with a wrench in hand and a nervous smile, and from the moment she opened the door, Sophia knew he was younger than she expected. Much younger. He couldn't have been more than 26. Maybe 27 at most. The way he held his tool bag, like it weighed more than just metal, told her he wasn't used to places like this. Not the kind of house where silence echoed through marble hallways and art pieces were lit like museum relics. "Evening, Mom, I'm David," he said, voice unsure but polite. His eyes flickered to the gold-gilded mirror behind her, then back to her face, though he couldn't quite hide the half-second pause at her robe. Sophia smiled softly, tilting her head. "It's just Sophia, and thank you for coming so late." She stepped aside, letting him in. The smell of his cologne, cheap but earnest, mingled with the jasmine candle burning in the foyer. It created a contrast that felt illicit, like something clean entering a space too polished. The air conditioning hummed low. The robe she wore, silk, ivory, nearly translucent, clung to her in the humidity of late summer. She hadn't worn anything underneath. Not for seduction, or maybe exactly for that. She hadn't decided yet. She was a woman who used to plan her movements like choreography. Tonight, she was improvising. David followed her into the kitchen, his boots leaving faint prints on the polished tile. He crouched beside the sink, unscrewing the cabinet doors. Sophia leaned against the counter, watching his broad shoulders flex with each movement. "So," she said lightly, "how long have you been doing this?" He looked up, pushing a strand of hair from his brow. "Couple years. Started during trade school. Pays okay. Better than I expected." She nodded, sipping from her glass. Then, like an afterthought, she held it out to him. "Water?" David blinked. "Oh, sure." She walked over to the fridge, poured from a pitcher into another glass, and returned, her fingers brushing his as she handed it to him. Their eyes met. His cheeks flushed slightly. She turned away, biting the inside of her lip. Under the sink, David fiddled with pipes and seals, murmuring about pressure and connectors. Sophia couldn't follow the technicalities, nor did she try. Her eyes traced the curve of his spine, the way his shirt lifted slightly at the back, revealing a strip of tan skin. And then, without quite meaning to, or maybe entirely meaning to, she tipped her glass. The water splashed across her chest, soaking the thin silk. She gasped, stepping back, looking down with theatrical surprise. "Oh God," she laughed breathlessly, "I'm such a klutz." David turned quickly, his eyes widening. "Are you okay?" Yes, just wet." Her laugh trailed into silence. The fabric clung to her like a second skin now. She could see the moment he noticed, the way his pupils dilated slightly, the way his throat bobbed when he swallowed. He averted his eyes. "I can grab a towel from my bag." "No, it's fine," she said, reaching for a napkin and dabbing herself uselessly. "Honestly, I needed to cool off anyway." Silence hung between them, taut like a string stretched to its limit. David turned back to the pipes, his motions slower now, less certain. Sophia sat on the counter, legs crossed, watching him with a gaze that was no longer idle. She wasn't thinking clearly, or perhaps, for the first time in months, she was. There was a clarity in this heat, in this raw awareness of her body, in the simple truth that this man was here, alive, within reach, and looking at her like she was real. Not like Mark did, from across a conference call screen. Not like a duty, or an accessory, or a signature on a shared mortgage. David finished the repairs quickly, far quicker than she'd hoped. He stood, wiping his hands on a cloth, eyes carefully avoiding hers. That should do it. No more leaks. Sophia slipped down from the counter. "You're fast." He chuckled, still not meeting her eyes. Guess I've done enough of them by now. She stepped closer. How much do I owe you? He hesitated. Well, I can invoice you later. If you prefer. She reached for her purse anyway, rummaging slowly. No, I'd rather take care of it now. Her movements were languid, deliberate. She wasn't playing a part. She was simply tired of denying the one that had always lived in her. He watched her, unsure. She could see the battle behind his eyes. Respect, caution, want. And then she asked, softly, have you ever been with an older woman? David? The silence after the question wasn't long, but it was thick, like the pause before a storm. He looked at her then. Really looked, and for a second, she saw the man he might become, strong, bold, reckless. The boy faded. No, he said, voice low, I haven't. Sophia stepped closer, closing the space between them. Her fingers reached for his wrist, the one still holding the wrench. You can leave now, she whispered, or you can stay. His hand dropped the tool to the floor. It clattered loudly, echoing through the quiet house. They didn't speak again that night. The faucet didn't leak anymore. But something else did, something deeper, uncontainable, something that rushed out of her with every breath, every touch, every inch of skin pressed against another. It wasn't love, not yet. It wasn't even lust, fully. It was hunger, for touch, for risk, for the feeling of being chosen. That night, Sophia didn't feel rich, or married, or proper. She felt like a woman drowning in silence who had just remembered how to scream. And David, he didn't feel like a contractor anymore. He felt like a secret, a sin, a possibility. She lay awake afterward, tracing the patterns on the ceiling, her body still humming. The sheets were tangled, her robe discarded somewhere on the floor. David had left after midnight, saying little, eyes unreadable. Sophia didn't know if he would return. She didn't care. But 2 days later, the faucet in the upstairs bathroom malfunctioned. And David came back. That was the beginning of Tuesdays. Mark received the video while sipping champagne on the 37th floor of the Burj Khalifa. Outside the towering glass windows, Dubai glimmered like a city built on promises and lies. Inside, the soft buzz of executives and luxury echoed through the lounge. It was his birthday, 42 today, and clients from Tokyo and Milan had sent him gifts wrapped in leather and silk. His phone vibrated between his fingers as he raised his glass. At first, he didn't pay attention. Another message, probably a greeting, but the sender was Adrian, his old college roommate. Now a venture capitalist based in LA. The subject line simply said, "You should see this." Mark clicked the video. The footage was grainy, tinted with the soft blue of twilight. The front porch of his Beverly Hills home appeared on screen. Then, Sophia, dressed in a long robe, hair loose, barefoot. She opened the door with a slow, almost deliberate grace. A man entered the frame. Younger, taller, work boots and a tool bag. They spoke for a second, no sound, just movement. Then Sophia leaned in, arms wrapped around him, lips brushed his cheek, or jaw, or maybe the corner of his mouth. It didn't matter. It was intimate, real, not a friendly hug, not a thank you. Mark watched the clip in full silence. When it ended, he didn't replay it, he simply put the phone down. A waiter appeared beside him, offering another glass. He declined. Later that evening, alone in the hotel suite, Mark opened the security system app on his phone. He hadn't used it in months. Sophia managed the house. But as he sifted through past notifications, his brows furrowed. Multiple entries for Tuesday afternoons. Same time, same camera angle, same man. Adrian had once come over to drop off a bottle of rare scotch. That must have been the day his phone had synced to the video feed without him noticing. One glitch, one coincidence, and now the illusion Mark had built was crumbling, quietly, efficiently, like the implosion of a luxury condo. He didn't call Sophia, didn't rage, didn't confront. Instead, Mark made a call to a man named Lewis, a private investigator known for his discretion. No police records, no paper trails, just results. Find out who he is, Mark said, where he lives, who he works for, and how long this has been going on. The next day, Lewis sent back a file. His voice, always dry and unbothered, cut through the phone like a blade. David Foster, 27, works freelance plumbing contracts around Los Angeles. No prior offenses, clean record, but he's been at your property 6 times in the last 2 months. Always on a Tuesday, never longer than 2 hours. Except once, 3 hours and 46 minutes. Mark said nothing. Lewis continued. Also, there's another thing. You might find it interesting. 2 weeks ago, David was seen having coffee with your wife's Pilates instructor. Male, early 30s. You want me to dig further? Mark paused. His mind turned, twisted. For months, he'd suspected something, but his suspicions had been vague, blurry. He thought Sophia was getting distant because of the new trainer. A tall, lean man named Julian who always seemed too friendly, too familiar. Mark had checked his Instagram, even tracked Sophia's gym sessions in his calendar, discreetly. But nothing ever connected. And now, it wasn't the man with the sculpted abs. It was the one with the wrench. Mark closed his laptop with care. Every movement controlled, measured. The next 2 days, he replayed everything in his mind like a silent film. The missed calls, the times Sophia didn't pick up, claiming to be running errands, or at a gallery. The odd spike in utilities. The time he saw a second toothbrush in the guest bathroom, then dismissed it. The details weren't new, but now, they had context. He returned to LA quietly. No announcement, no flight post. He told Sophia he'd be gone all week. Instead, he sat in his car across the street from their house on Tuesday afternoon. At 1:57 p.m., David's truck pulled into the driveway. Mark didn't move. At 3:42 p.m., the truck pulled away. Still, Mark didn't move. He just stared at the house. The windows, the lines of ivy crawling up the stone. The place he had bought to represent permanence. Now it was just a shell. Later, he walked into the home like a stranger. Everything was clean. The kitchen sparkled. Sophia was in the sunroom, painting. She looked up, surprised but not flustered. "You're home early." "Flight changed," Mark said flatly. "Weather over Istanbul." She nodded, brushing hair from her cheek. "Well, happy birthday again." He smiled thinly. He noticed the faint scent of citrus in the air. Not her usual perfume, maybe something David wore. It clung to the air like static. That night, Mark opened his safe and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was the birthday gift he had planned to give her, a diamond bracelet from Graf. Custom engraved. He held it for a long moment, then closed the box. The next morning, he placed it on the kitchen counter. Alongside it, a copy of the video. No note, just facts. Sophia found it after her morning walk. Her hand trembled when she opened the USB on her laptop. Her breath caught halfway through the footage. She watched herself, frame by frame, from the outside. It was a strange kind of horror, seeing your private sins from a public lens. Mark was upstairs, packing. She followed him, voice thin. "Mark." He didn't turn. "You made your choice. You thought I wouldn't notice. Or that I wouldn't care." Her eyes welled. "It didn't mean anything. I was lonely. I didn't think. That's the problem." He turned then, eyes like winter. "You didn't think. You didn't ask. You just reached for the first thing that made you feel alive. Like a child touching a flame." She reached for him. He stepped back. "It was just a leak," she whispered. Mark shook his head slowly. "No, it was a flood. And now, the foundation's gone." That night, he checked into a hotel downtown. He didn't cry, didn't scream. He simply lay back on stiff white sheets and stared at the ceiling. He thought about the day he met Sophia, in a bookstore on Fifth Avenue. How she smiled at him over a copy of a Neruda collection. How she once said, "Love isn't found, it's maintained, like plumbing." He laughed once, sharp, bitter, and then he slept. It was late, the kind of late where even the air in Beverly Hills seemed to hold its breath. Sophia lay tangled in linen sheets, her robe barely covering her body, her skin still flushed from what had just happened. David stood near the edge of the bed, hastily pulling on his shirt. His breathing was uneven. He glanced once toward the window, as if checking for the time or for something else, an instinct perhaps. Not fear, not yet. Then they heard it, the faint but unmistakable sound of the front door opening. Sophia froze. David whispered, "Is someone?" She didn't answer. She was already out of bed, grabbing the edge of the doorframe for balance. Her pulse throbbed in her throat. She knew that sound. It was the deadbolt sliding back, the weight of Italian leather soles across oak floors. Mark was home. Without a word, Sophia wrapped the robe tighter around her body and hurried down the hall. David, silent, followed a few steps behind but stopped at the top of the staircase. In the living room, Mark sat in the armchair, legs crossed, phone in hand, his posture perfectly composed. Beside him on the coffee table was a small gift box, the expensive kind with textured wrapping paper. But the paper was damp, edges curled slightly like it had been splashed. He looked up when she entered. Sophia's breath hitched. "You're home," unannounced, he said simply. "Surprise." His voice was level, no strain, no rage. Then his eyes moved past her, toward the stairwell. David's shadow was visible at the edge of the landing. A flicker of recognition passed across Mark's face. The kind that doesn't scream, it slices. Sophia turned, saw it too, and whispered sharply, "Go." David didn't wait. The front door opened again. Closed. Silence. Mark stood. He didn't approach her. Instead, he picked up the box from the table and held it out. "Your birthday gift," he said. "I had it custom made. Took 3 weeks. Engraved." She reached for it, but he pulled it back, then opened it himself. Inside was a delicate diamond bracelet, shimmering even in the low light. But the tissue beneath was soaked. Tiny droplets clung to the inner lid. "Looks like it got wet," he murmured. Sophia's voice was almost inaudible. "Mark, he interrupted. "How many times did you call him to fix the leak?" She stared at him. "Once," he asked. "Twice." "Every Tuesday since May." Her lips trembled. "I was alone. We were all alone, Sophia," he said, his voice sharper now, colder. "Some of us just didn't invite strangers into our bed to fill the silence." She stepped forward, hands pleading. "Please, just let me explain." "I don't want an explanation," he snapped. Then, softer, "I want honesty. But that ship left port a long time ago." Mark reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. He swiped, tapped, turned the screen toward her. A list of timestamps, photos, clips. This is every time he entered this house. Every charge on the card used to pay him. Every camera ping on the system. Sophia's knees buckled slightly. She gripped the edge of the couch for balance. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she whispered. "No," Mark said. "It wasn't supposed to happen at all." She sobbed, tears tracing lines down her face. "I missed you. You were always gone. I felt invisible. And this made you feel seen." She couldn't answer. Her silence was heavier than the truth. Mark turned, walked to the dining table, and placed a thick envelope on the polished surface. "Divorce papers," he said. "My lawyer already signed. You just need to add your name." Sophia covered her mouth. "I was going to give you the bracelet," Mark continued, "before I left again, but now I think it belongs to the drain. Like everything else we built." Then he paused, looked at her with a gaze that froze her in place. "You kept calling a plumber," he said quietly, "but you never realized it wasn't the pipes that were broken. It was you." He walked to the door. As it closed behind him, Sophia stood alone in the quiet. The gift box was still open. The bracelet caught the light one last time. And beneath it, the paper soaked through, like water searching for cracks in the foundation. Upstairs, the bedsheets were still warm. But the house had never felt colder. The courtroom was quiet in the way only rooms full of consequences could be. Sophia sat at the long wooden table, hands clasped in her lap, the cool surface beneath her fingertips grounding her in a moment she never imagined would come. Mark was across from her, flanked by lawyers dressed in charcoal and silence. He didn't look at her. Not once. The judge read the final ruling. Voice steady, neutral. Custody granted to Mark. No appeals, no further hearings. Outside, reporters waited, their lenses hungry. A scandal in Beverly Hills. A beautiful wife, a high-profile husband, and a story soaked in betrayal. The tabloids loved it. By evening, her name was everywhere. Sophia Allen, heiress of her own undoing. She moved out within a week. The estate she once designed every corner of. The home where she memorized every creak and echo. It wasn't hers anymore. She signed the final document under a ceiling she once painted herself. Watched the pen bleed her name onto the page like an apology that wouldn't take. She ended up in a modest apartment on the east side. Nothing glamorous. The windows fogged easily. The tiles in the bathroom were chipped. And the kitchen sink, ironically, dripped. Drip, drip, drip. She didn't call anyone to fix it. David had vanished. After the media firestorm, the plumbing company terminated his contracts. Clients stopped answering his calls. He was a ghost long before he disappeared from Sophia's life. No goodbyes, just silence. She heard a rumor he left town. Or joined a crew out in Arizona. She didn't look further. She spent her days avoiding the news. But the echoes of her old life seeped in. Magazine covers. Gossip panels. Would you forgive her? Should she have known better? No kids should be raised by someone so reckless. At night, the drip from the faucet became company. A metronome for regret. She could have called maintenance, but part of her needed it. The sound was a tether. A punishment. A pulse in an otherwise flatline space. Sometimes she stared at the blank wall across from her mattress and whispered his name. Not Mark, not David, just his. The name of the man she once imagined herself growing old with. The man who bought her poetry books and diamond bracelets. Who once held her face like it was a treasure. There was no going back. No calls to make. No faucets to fix. One afternoon, a letter arrived. From Mark's lawyer. Final division of assets. Neutral tone. Bullet points. Paragraphs of things once shared. One line read, "The bracelet is retained in trust for their son." Their son. The words cut deeper than any headline ever could. Because the court didn't just take away her house. It took away bedtime stories. Sunday pancakes. The sound of tiny feet running down a hallway. All gone. Because of a moment. Because of many. She began to write. Not stories. Not letters. Just lines. Sentences that came at night. Scribbled on receipts. On the backs of envelopes. She wrote about plumbing and loneliness. About leaks in hearts. About things that break quietly. Over time, when no one's listening, one line stuck with her. Nothing floods a home faster than silence. Weeks passed, then months. Seasons turned without ceremony. Sophia grew into a routine that no longer included love, or desire, or redemption, but she did begin to walk. Every morning, past cafes and playgrounds she didn't enter. Past homes that looked like hers once did. Sometimes, she'd pause near hardware stores. Look at wrenches, stainless steel pipes, the ghost of a smile tugging at the edge of her lips before it faded. She never stepped inside, not until one evening. The faucet stopped. No warning, just silence. She turned the handle. Nothing, not a drop, not even a groan in the pipes. For the first time in over a year, Sophia picked up her phone and almost dialed a service number. Her thumb hovered, but then she put it down. She walked to the sink, touched the cold metal, and whispered, "I'll live." She filled a pitcher from the bathroom tap, poured it into a bowl, and washed her hands slowly, deliberately. The silence was no longer unbearable. It was earned. Later, as she sat by the window, she picked up the small notepad she kept nearby. On the last page, she wrote, "For the first time in a long time, I wanted water, but the faucet had nothing left to give. And somehow, neither did she. But that," she realized, "was a beginning too. Some leaks, once started, never really stop. And some goodbyes aren't loud. They're just final." Sophia thought she could fill the silence. But in the end, all she did was flood her own life. "If you stayed with me until now, thank you. But we're not done." Because not every affair begins with loneliness. Some begin with desire. In the next story, we meet Diana from Houston. A woman who didn't wait to be seen. She locked the door herself. And what happened next was recorded by the one person she never expected. Her daughter. Subscribe, and I'll tell you everything.